Hello and welcome to the Secret Podcast, coming to you from the Secret Gallery in Astoria, Oregon. Today, I am with Philip Barish and Sam Vaughan, and we're going to be talking with Sam Vaughan about his art, about the way he works, about printmaking in general, and I'm sure much more. And Sam has several works in our current show, Is That Your Horse, at the Secret Gallery, and you can see some of his work at samvaughan.com or at www.thesecret.gallery. And so with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Philip to get us started and then to Sam to introduce himself.
All right. Hi, Sam.
Hi, Phil. Yep.
It's a great pleasure chatting with you. I chatted with you when you had some pieces in the Secret Gallery last, fall, September or something. And it was a pretty raucous artist talk. In fact, it was so raucous, basically, you cleared the room. So it's really nice that we can be talking again. I'm sure you remember that.
Yes, that's talk, right. Violence broke out, as I recall. It's an ugly scene.
It was excellent. Yeah. So it'd be a pleasure chatting with you here.
Well, thank you. Likewise.
So the first thing I want to ask you about is the San Francisco Art Institute, which the obituary has not yet been written, but it seems to be on life support. And as an alumni of that institution, is there anything you want to say about what that might represent, or are you in any way sentimental about your education there, or I'm just curious.
Oh, yeah, actually, I am rather sentimental about the old place. Had a lot of fun there. I've been in contact with lots of my old friends who I met there and other people who've gone there, and the general consensus seems to be that they will never actually die. I mean, they're in perpetual financial crisis mode. I remember when I was there in the 90s, that was the case. And I think, sure enough, last I heard, somebody was going to step in. It was like a trifling amount of money they needed. It was like $19 million, which, if we produced a single hot shit modern artist over the last 50 years, somebody's got to be able to sell a picture for that money. Come on.
Well, and I would think so too. I mean, the alumni is, pretty significant. I mean, that, one of the things that institution represents is not just a lot of alumni that went off to forge, really excellent careers, but also I think philosophically that institutions like that are really critical to understanding art, making art, all of the processes and the products that come out of that. So, I mean, obviously you sound like you really had an excellent education there. So I'm watching that situation. I'm just watching it. And just so you know, I was born in San Francisco.
Yeah, I don't know. I think its claim to fame, the Old Art Institute, is that it's like the last of the exclusively fine art institution. I think. I mean, that was something I heard at some point. It certainly seemed to be the case when I was there. There was absolutely no nod to any sort of practical education. It was pure, it was pure art. Like no illustration, no computer stuff. Not that I recall anyway. It was all sculpture and whatnot. And yeah, it was really goofy when I went there. It was shit. You didn't really have to go to any classes if you didn't want to. It was just like this big studio with people wandering around, effectively. So, and then whenever you talk to someone who went to the Art Institute, it's kind of like people who've moved to Astoria. Like if you say you went there in the 90s like I did, you'll meet someone who said, oh, fuck it, I was in there in the 70s, and that's when it was really wild and really inefficient. And then someone will say, I was there in the 60s when, nobody, it's always an ever increasing spiral of irresponsible mayhem.
Well, and also it becomes romanticized, the mythology that gets built around it. I mean, all of those kind of wonderful things that happen.
Right.
It's been around 150 years, and so there's already a deeply embedded mythology. And then you throw in that whoever was there and came out of there, and all of the influences it had, and blah blah blah. Then it becomes romanticized. There's no way out of it.
Well, it's a great location. What the hell? Anyway, I think the old jump is going to survive, as last I heard, and they're just going to find someone to loan them yet more money so they can keep being fuck-ups.
Okay, so you're thinking
and
maybe they want to go the
producing fuck-ups
non-revertar
every year.
inertis route?
So what?
The non-revertar inertis route? Is that what you're thinking, that they will not return unrevenged? Because we're going to chat about that now. You will not return unrevenged. Am I correct on that?
Unavenged, damn right. Yes, that's us Vaughns.
Okay, you're right. So I did a little homework here, because that obviously affects how I view your work, and your work is interesting for many reasons to begin with. But so, okay, the Vaughns, they've been around since 907 is what I found out. The Earl of Hereford and his wife, who was descended from the King of South Wales. That the original non-revertar inultus was a war cry, that the mottos did not appear until the 14th or 15th centuries. And so where I'm going with this is that I really view your art in a very different way, having looked historically at that term, I will not return unrevenged. So in terms of the mottos, they're seldom formed part of grants of arms, and they were under most heraldic authorities. The motto was optional to a coat of arms. So here's where I'm going with all that information, Sam, is that one of the things that I responded to in looking at your work is that it definitely has a heraldic kind of tradition built into the imagery, and your use of language is not literal use of language, but you seem to be playing with language as an idea of it, the possibility of a motto. So how far off base am I on that stuff?
I don't know. I just remember Googling the Vaughn name, and I thought that motto was like so unpleasant sounding. I liked it. It has a very kind of sinister quality to it. As far as like heraldry,
your work has a sinister quality to it too. I just can't help but think
that's
that there
true.
is such
Maybe there's something in the Vaughn blood which is tainted. That's entirely possible. I like the possibility
that's
anyway.
What it sounds like to me. I mean, the thing about heraldry is that you're tracing genealogy, protocol, rank. One of the terms that came up was the shorthand of history. And when I look at your artwork, it's not just like a shorthand of history. You have a shorthand of art history that then, to me, becomes really informed by the fact that you're a Vaughn. And that becomes part of what it is you're playing with. I mean, your work is pretty dark, but in a really funny way.
Yeah. Well, the Welsh people aren't known for their sense of humor, I don't think. They're kind of like Irish people without a sense of humor. They still drink, but they don't produce any poets. Yeah. I don't know. I can't claim any real kinship there because I don't know much about it. But the heraldry angle is interesting. I do have a sort of I am attracted to that very stylized representation of information. It's sort of like in the same sense as you have the three rampant dragons or whatever the hell you would have on your shield, just kind of beating people over the head with an image.
Yeah, well, right, and it's an image. I mean, the thing is, it's imagery, so it's iconic. The language itself wasn't introduced until later on, and so the actual language you're talking about and the work that you produce is that it's actual iconography. I mean, there's storytelling going on there, but you also have all kinds of references to art history that, particularly in the fact that you do reproductions, that, you do prints. I mean, there's stuff in there that you can't get around the fact that you are in some level embracing art history, and that part of what you're doing is the whole idea that, because of your surname and all of the, heraldic traditions and that, I've really responded to that in terms of how I view your work, in terms of how I believe it's informed in deeper ways than I originally thought.
Yeah, well, it is certainly informed. I mean, it's essentially a kind of vomitus of whatever is passing through my brain at any given point. I don't have a whole lot of system to it, though. In that sense, it would certainly differ from heraldry and whatnot. I mean, I am pursuing. I tend to throw stuff at the wall. I'm a history buff, so I have lots of history, both just regular world history, politics, as well as art history. And I'm very attracted to the old. Actually, lately I've been looking a lot at the classicists, the neoclassicists, like David and his gang, and those really didactic pictures of the, Patroclus returning with the body of so and so, or death of who's his name, the great historical epics. And I've there was one I have up there.
Raft of the Medusas.
Yeah, right. Raft of the Medusa.
Yeah, there's a solid one right there.
Yeah, but I'm aware of that stuff. I was trying to think of like an example of something I'm working on right now, which would help to illustrate what I'm talking about. Because, I'm doing the Atomic War stuff. I'm doing a new version of that. So I've added Klaus Fuchs, who is a spy. I've put him into the mix. I'm adding figures. You have to have the allegorical nude woman in the picture. So I'm just gonna. So she's still there. And who else was I putting in? But then I thought, well, fuck it, that's too coherent. You have this group of guys who are participating in the Manhattan Project. It's too So I said no. Then I started drawing some other people sitting at a table. I stepped back. I looked at it again. Thought about it for a while, and I've come up with, what do we got there? Che Guevara, Joe Namath, Akira Kurosawa, and Gandhi. I've got pictures of all four of these guys. Yeah, there's I've got pictures of all four of them when they're like in their late teens or early 20s. Like young men.
Wow.
Yes, and they're all sitting at this table. And it's a street scene in Peru. And I'm not sure why that is. So that's an example of just something which is. I remember the Akira. Who the hell was it? Yeah, I mean, I've been doing these dual portraits for many moons. That's kind of where that Custer and Kate pictures came from that stream.
Well, you got David Hasselhoff. I mean, you've got some, your references are really fun. And I got to point out to you, one of your images, you have a Che Guevara where it actually has a Sam tattoo on his leg. I have to assume that's your tattoo on his leg, correct?
It says Sam, right?
It does. And also, Long, there's a microphone. It says Sam, a microphone. I have to assume that's you that's your microphone.
Yeah. I'm just a conceited bastard.
Sam, I am. I do not like that Sam, I am.
I actually used to draw myself into pictures, but I stopped that. No, too old and ugly. I don't want to upset my fans. No, I'm not sure.
your narcissism is fading. Is that the issue there? The bloom
not
is
Sam's.
fading.
No, not my narcissism. Maybe it's going the other way. Maybe I'm thinking now these historical figures aren't worthy to be in the same panel as me. Maybe that's it. More likely.
Yeah. Well, and another thing I want to point out in looking at your body of work too is that it's not just that in terms of what you're doing. Like, I know you're talking about your historical figures, but one of the things that really struck me is that the work that I was looking at, which is isolated into bodies of work, that technically what you're doing mirrors what's happening in terms of the images. And I'll be real specific with what I'm saying here. In the series like the Franken-Sybils, okay, they're large scale. And they're primarily done with pen and ink and with colored pencil, and they're very much anatomical and archaeological at the same time. And so in terms of having a title that references the Mary Shelley character, that I felt you were moving through techniques that mirrored the literariness of that image, but also mirrored it in a way that you were really working with your materials. And I see that throughout the bodies of work of yours that I've seen. And now keep in mind, I saw pieces of yours in the original form in the show at the Secret Gallery, but what I've been looking at on your website, and it's very interesting how you have that set. I mean, it's kind of chronological, but I see it more material oriented. And so talk about how you work in terms of, you seem to develop bodies of work like pen and ink and paper, and then you do paintings, and then you do prints. So are you working on these things simultaneously, or do they come up independently of each other?
That's a good point. Actually, I tend to develop series of things which are going to be in charcoal, or another series will tend to be in ink. And I haven't been doing a lot of painting lately, so my paintings are sort of all over the map. But yeah, certainly true that I work in series, or I'm returning to a theme. I guess you're talking about that. There's like a sequence of 3 pictures with just sort of degenerating Frankensteins.
Yeah, well, it's more than 3 pictures, though. There's a whole series of them, and it's not. You're correct. I mean, it's like there's an anatomical sense, and I thought immediately. I thought of like George Bridgman and Bern Hogarth and Stephen Peck. The great kind of like anatomy art guys, but at the same time, you're working the physical material in a way that is mirroring the images, and scale has a lot to do with it, because those pieces, they're large. They're much larger than most of the other stuff that I was looking at.
Huh. Yeah. Well, the Frankensteins, I'm really interested in the. I might have been babbling this at the art talk up there, but I can't remember. But it would be. There's something about. I like the idea of the body just assembled, and also being sort of. Being like it,
of course,
uninhabited. Like it doesn't have a personality inside it. It's just this kind of mass of meat moving around. And that's an important part of the Frankenstein thing. So it's actually they're anti-anatomical. If you look at the Frankensteins, of course, they're really just bizarre, more or less expressionist figures with chunks put in. And I like the idea of it just being clumsily assembled by someone who's the beauty of the figure. That's not even their goal. He's just trying to stitch the thing together and see if he can make it move. And then the thing, it has no. So that's what I'm thinking about. In those pictures, and then Frankenstein is standing there handing him something, or he's just sort of, he doesn't quite know what to make of it at the end of the day. Yeah, I've always liked that story, and then the sense of the uninhabited body. That's just this being, which isn't really a being. It's just sort of the human form. And cobbled together half-assedly by someone trying to make a person. This seems to me like a great, this is what an artist does all the time anyway. So,
yeah, but I would argue that it's effective because there's a level of craft that allows you to pull it off. If the craft were it would fail.
Yeah, no. Well, that's the thing. I mean, the Frankenstein is very ugly and he's clunky. Is the monster, the guy? The doctor is just a normal man. But yeah, I'm always working on my chops, trying to draw better and render and all that kind of stuff. I'm a great believer in technique, for sure.
Yeah, right. So drafting skills. Did you learn drafting skills like prior to any education, or did you grow up drawing? Or how and where did you learn to draw, and at what point did you realize the more you worked on it, the higher you could develop your skill level?
I was drawing since I was a little kid. I think I've got a picture someplace my mom saved of a dinosaur I drew when I was 1 or something, or 2. But I distinctly remember, and I wanted to catch up. I'm going to ask my stepfather about this next time I talk to him, because when I was a little kid, he had a friend was visiting, whose name I don't remember. I was very small. He said, whatever the guy's name was, Joe. Joe knows how to draw. And I was like, really? He said, yeah, what do you want me to draw? I said, draw a monster. And I sat down, but I was standing behind the guy as he drew, and he drew a sort of devil with a tail. It was very good, as I remember. I remember thinking at the time, well, that's not the kind of monster I wanted, but I didn't want to be bitchy about it. But I distinctly remember I was in awe. It just was magic to me how this thing appeared on the page. And I really think, apart from any natural chemical imbalance which has caused me to do this so long, that was like a seminal moment in the whole procedure. I was like, I really was astounded by that.
That's really cool. How old did you say you were?
Oh, fuck. I was like maybe 7, younger perhaps. Mm-hmm. I don't know.
Well, that's a epiphany.
Yeah. I distinctly remember it to this day. Well, now I want to check with my stepfather because one thing I've learned about my memories is they tend to be self-serving and full of shit. But if I think the essential
the memory is self-serving, full of shit, or the stepfather.
No, the memories.
Okay, just checking.
I remember that, and then I started. I've been practicing ever since. Like, I want it to look good. Damn it! It's a constant, as you guys both know, being artistes, it's just a constant grind to improve the technique, and then the content is always there if you've got any kind of ideas, but you have to be able to put it in flesh one way or the other.
Yeah. Well, you have to have the ideas. I mean, that's the whole thing, is that the level of craft, and, that's great to have a high level of craft and to be a really excellent draftsman. It's even better when you have ideas you want to explore, and that craft is then at your service for that exploration.
Yeah. I get the feeling with Sam, though, that the ideas are always there.
Oh,
and I've been to Sam's studio a couple times. There, the art cave, and the place is just crawling with stuff and with unfinished works, and with finished works, and just piles of things everywhere in the books. And I feel like, Sam, like you have no lack of ideas.
Well, thanks. I definitely have lots of ideas. I do like to let them sort of cross-fertilize, because I don't. I like to discover the thing while I'm working on it. I know this is. I've read lots of interviews with artists and movie makers and whatnot, and that seems to be a common thread. You can't just start with XX idea and hammer it all the way through to the end and come up with XX. It's just, you have to. For one thing, it usually doesn't work because the ideas are not pictures; they're two different things. But then, just for the subjects, I like to, let them bounce off each other and develop, so that. Custer's just kind of a running gag. I don't really have an affinity for the guy. It's almost like self-parody. Like, well, what the fuck? If I've got 2 unfinished Custer drawings, I can add them to something else. Or the devil with his potatoes, the people holding potatoes. It's like, well, it's just the most mundane thing. Why would he be staring at it? It's sort of, it doesn't matter. But, but yeah, I do. I have been thinking a lot about that, though. Just recently, it's been part of my practice to try and figure out, to what extent is this like a cohesive attempt at illustrating, bringing to life this idea, and to what extent is it just, I'm going to be, the shapes are just appearing on the page, and I'm going to let them do what they want. You sort of, it's like a constant negotiation with what's on the page, and you don't always win.
Yeah, well,
you don't want to win. You don't want to win because whatever pops up is like better than the idea you had, which is.
But it's really good that you bring that up, because one of the things about the way you work in terms of how I respond to the physicalness of your pieces is that you're very much a sculptor. I mean, I know that you're working 2-dimensionally, but I see incredible sculptural properties into how you do that. So in looking at your images, I'm just thinking that if you were working a block of clay, you are reducing the clay, you're molding the clay, it's malleable, except that it's not clay. You're working in a 2-dimensional format. So like when I was looking at your Neanderthal depot, right, which well, I mean, and it's really interesting because it's not just that you have these, these kind of like humanoid Neanderthal figures. It's all the stuff happening around them, behind them, under them, that have a very sculptural quality.
Yeah, well, that's another idea I've been kicking around fairly recently, is that, if you're going to represent something, you want to add, it has to have some amount of energy in it. You don't want to just have a photograph or a photographic reproduction. So you can add things to it different ways. You can express it. You can use an expressive stroke, which would be like you draw or paint it in a fairly loose fashion, so that the motion of your hand itself is imparting some energy or reflecting some of your thought onto the page. Or you can conceive of the thing in a fucked up shape, like a chair, for example, and you imagine it in this odd shape, or you imagine it, you draw it out very loosely in the sense that just like as your mind travels over the form. Like there's the seat of the chair, the arm, the leg. You don't really care what the fuck they look like. And then you have the outline of it. Now you imagine that fucked up shape existing in real 3D space and render it nicely as though it exists. So, or another way to do it,
which gives it a sculptural quality. And so, what I'm saying is that
then it has like a combination. It has a combination of really smooth technique and odd subject. Which is not a new idea. It's just like there's two different ways of like injecting some amount of your will into the picture. But those Neanderthals
for me, there's more interest for me in the images that are only left partially completed. That you're much more liberal in terms of how you view the image by the fact that you're not making it so literal. And so once again, in the Neanderthal Depot, there's a lot of really interesting stuff that's happening because it's only like half baked, and the very the very nature of it only being partially finished gives it this really kind of animatic quality.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I like a lot of choppy stuff and unfinished. And there's another part of me that thinks it's chicken. It's like you're not finishing it. You're leaving it to the viewer to imagine. You're copping out, and it's because there's not enough mental gas to finish the thing properly. I mean, that's a possibility, but basically, no, I also like the crude, unfinished area. I can deal with that. I'm suspicious of it, though. I'm also,
Okay, so talk about that a little bit when you say you're suspicious, because what makes you suspicious of having ideas that are not completely distilled in a kind of like draftsman quality way?
Oh, I'm not even talking about like finished drawing or finished technique. I'm talking about the space it occupies in the picture.
So more of the formal, aspects of it.
I mean, I'm not really this uptight. These are just ideas I kick around when I'm working. I think like, should it be the case that every part of the image you've made a decision, and now that decision could be to leave it blank or to say the hell with it. But is there, is it has it been adjudicated, as it were?
Okay.
And then now I'm not saying I subscribe to that. I'm just saying it's something I've been it's something I kick around when I'm working. Like, at what point do you say? And every artist, it's one of the big puzzles, of course. Like, when is the thing finished? When has it been overworked?
The thing is, see, Sam, you legitimize the idea. Let's get into Didesco Mori, right? Grow death. So you legitimize what you're talking by having that.
Pardon?
Well, by having that as kind of like the flag of the Dead Duck Press, right? Didesco Mori, so essentially grow death. Doesn't that legitimize what it is you're talking about?
Well, actually, I could be illiterate here. I thought that meant I am enriched by death.
Okay, well, maybe you might be. I mean, we might have two different translations there.
Right.
And if that's the case, then yours is better than mine. My translation was grow death, but if yours is enriched,
I kind of like yours better, but maybe it's just because I'm hearing it now for the first time. Grow death. Yes.
Awesome.
Yeah.
No, but you made me think of the Neanderthal, and I remember those started off as what were they? They were just expressionistic figures. And then I started with an experiment of, that's what it was. Those things are like fairly large. They're like 42 by 36 inches. And I wanted to work on some big sheets of paper. And what I did was I made some little 3 by 4 inch cards to do preparatory drawings, right? Same proportion. And I did these thumbnail sketches in like, it was under 30 seconds. And I just scaled them up onto these large sheets. And that's how you end up with all the errors and fuck-ups and the random lines where the pen had scraped over the page inadvertently. They had to become something. And I scaled them up. I wanted to see if I could preserve the energy of that quick thumbnail, how it would look at that scale, and what would happen, basically. And that's how and then I stepped back and looked at the figures, and I said, God, these things are like lumpy and grotesque. What are they? They're like cavemen. Okay, they're Neanderthals. And then once I got, that's just sort of It occurred to me as I was working. And then as I actually made more of them, then I started thinking, well, screw it. And I started reading about Neanderthals because I was now curious. And there was something I read about them where they, for a long time, they couldn't identify the fossils properly or with great accuracy because they could only find their skull caps for some reason. Like they had, or maybe it was a coincidence, but they had lots of skull caps and no complete faces. And so in one of those pictures, one of the guys is just like, he's got like I think a bunch of heads or skulls, and he's just knocking the skull caps off all of them. So there was some purpose.
Yeah.
But, and then the plants, and I love those. Man, I had a lot of fun doing those. But there again, see, it was almost too much fun making those. It made me suspicious of them. And then
to make it even funnier, so when you label them as the El Cerrito digs, right? And
yeah.
Thinking, well, El Cerrito was actually created because it was refugees from the 1906 San Francisco earthquake. And then it got me thinking, well, maybe there's some subtext about artists that relocated from San Francisco into El Cerrito, which gives the digs like more meaning. And then I thought, well, maybe I'm not even like, maybe I'm kind of like reading more into this than there is, but I can't help but think that that's in there.
Well, nope. Sorry, you're reading more into it. I can't. I want to lie.
I'm so good.
I'm looking at myself in the mirror, and I'm like, "You can't say yes, Sam. You can't say this little angel and devil on my shoulder. You mustn't." No, I'm oblivious of that. I only called it the El Cerrito Digs because I have my studio in El Cerrito that year. That's all there is to that.
Well, it was a nice try on my end. It really was. I mean, it was an overreach, okay, and that's just the way it went.
No, I appreciate it. I would take it if I could, but can't.
And let's not forget,
though.
You're working in a very narrow but deep field, decorations for degenerates. Let's not forget that. It's narrow but deep. Yeah.
Narrow but yeah. Well, yeah, it's that was something I was pondering. What is the nature of art and all that kind of shit many moons ago, and I came to the conclusion I'm a manufacturer of decorations. Like, what is that? In the deep thought department, but I've kind of liked decorations for degenerates. I needed a motto for Dead Duck Press, so I came up with that one.
Yeah, well, what was funny about Dead Duck too is and I was thinking about Dead Duck, and once again, it's just the connection. It probably doesn't exist, but it was the mallard duck that died when it hit the Glass Natural History Museum in Rotterdam, and it dropped to the ground, and another duck mounted it. And it's considered scientifically the first homosexual necrophilia in the mallard. And every year on that day, it's celebrated. And I thought, well, maybe that's part of the dead duck thing too.
So for Christ, you're pulling my leg, right?
No, that's a true story. I thought maybe you had that in there. It's on
yes, I did. That was. No, I've never heard of the.
Okay. Oh my God!
I've never heard of the necrophiliac duck.
That was part of what you do. I just figured the dead duck thing was in there. So every June 5th is Dead Duck Day in Rotterdam. It celebrates that particular scientific thing.
I will be sending them some promotional material.
So, Sam, do you want to start the interview over, and you can just say, "Well, I was thinking in particular about the Rotterdam."
Precisely, Philip. I couldn't sleep that night when I read about the homosexual necrophiliac ducks. So driven by a vision, I went out the next day and bought a lithographic press. Thinking of the refugees, the poor shivering refugees in El Cerrito in 1906.
Yes, exactly. There you have it.
There you go. Okay, let's use that part of the tape. Let's not make me sound like a jackass here. Ignoramus. I don't mean to. I'm not meaning to shoot down these ideas. I had no idea about the El Cerrito or the duck thing.
But your work is broadly satirical. I mean, you have an enormous amount of parody. You have an enormous amount of satire. You have an enormous amount of history and art history that you enjoy, obviously, making fun of.
Yes. Well, that's yeah. I'm trying to funny you should mention that. I'm sort of trying to get away from that a little bit, but I just feel like, I enjoy working that way, and I make no apologies for having lots and lots of satire and humor, but I also would like to not even to be, I don't know. I get a little tired of my own jokes from time to time, so there's some things which I make, but everything I do is just sort of strange in any case, I guess. And so people, like my drunk women in landscape, those are pretty normal pictures, I think. But then there's like a couple, and there's the title, and then there's like always a couple beer bottles in the foreground. But that's pretty low key, at least.
Well, and the Madonnas, and there was a whole series of Madonnas, and each one got more and more absurd. And at the same time, as you got more absurd in terms of the Madonna, you got more like referential as far as how the Madonnas were framed. I saw those functioning as kind of like a walk through art history in terms of portraiture as you viewed it, moving through one weird Madonna to the next. And I'll also point out those paintings. Those are actual paintings.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, they definitely build. I like working in a series. I like to take an idea, you work it into a picture, see what develops. Usually some things pop up while you're working that you hadn't thought of, and you like them or don't like them. And then you do another one, and based on that, and I found that, it's... You can work in a series like that. You can get a lot out of it and discover lots of shit that you didn't suspect was in there. And then also at a certain point, you kind of turn the corner and realize you're just regurgitating the same crap.
Well, right, and you're right. There's a time to abandon a series at that point. But one of the things I'd like to point out in the Madonna series in particular is that you really explore the idea of who you are as a painter. They're well painted.
Oh. Well, thanks. I'm working on my painting technique, which I have to admit is not as good as my drawing technique, but what the fuck? I'm catching up fast. I'm working on... I'm working... what was I thinking? Shit. It was something I almost made a mental note to myself to mention, and now, of course, I can't remember. So, what were you saying?
Well, okay, so your use of text, that's another thing, and when I'm thinking of here specifically the red paper dreadfuls, right?
Yes.
And the text apparently doesn't really mean anything other than decorative. Am I correct on that?
Almost. Actually, it's a good illustration of I used to use a lot of text, and I rarely do these days, and I'm not sure why, but I remember that was about 15 or more years ago or something. And I really like letter forms. I like text. And what was I doing? At first, I would write nonsense phrases in English onto the pictures just as I'm working. If something occurs to me and I think it's funny and it fits, I'll just write it in there. I'm too uptight to do that these days. But that would be one way of putting the text in. But then that became a little too arbitrary for my taste. I still wanted, you're looking at the thing, and I don't want it to say anything in English because it's like, well, fuck. Then it says, and it is what it is. It says anchor. And people will justifiably read the word and make conclusions based on it. But I don't even want that. I just want the shapes of the letters. So I started using just gobbledygook. That didn't work either because it just was gobbledygook. It didn't function in either department. It was distracting and weak. And then I hit upon the idea of just putting in Latin phrases, which I don't speak. But nonetheless, they're coherent somehow, psychologically to the viewer. So you have these forms there. And there's phrases on those red paper dreadfuls. I remember it's like, crap, what were they? Mutando, mutandis, various things. They're all like standard Latin tags. But, it was an example. I liked... So I didn't want to actually have something written on the damn thing, which would distract her.
Well, but at the same time, one of the pieces you had in the secret gallery was dollar. It was it was an actual the writing the calligraphic form off of a dollar bill.
Oh, which one was that one?
It was an image, and I've got to think who it was. It was a celebrity type image with the dollar bill calligraphic style around it.
Oh,
which would automatically make it read in a different way.
Yeah, no, there's a good example. See, I had forgotten that. So I have been adding text to pictures in the recent past, just
But in that
not as
case,
much as
the
I used
text is so specific because it's not just text; it's an actual,
to. Yeah, right.
it's a
Caption
needle
says
tender. It changes it.
It says "Stop Degas bullying" is what it was, right?
Okay, there you go.
Right,
Yeah,
right,
yeah.
yep.
Two pictures of Edgar Degas. Yes. No,
There
I
it is.
like
That's
money
it.
forms.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a whole bunch of art based on money forms and shapes. I'm very attracted to it. I love engraving and circling back to your heraldry observation. It's like this sort of that formalized. What the hell am I thinking of? Formalized format. I do find attractive. I haven't been doing much of it lately.
Okay, so your prints. Talk about your prints because it's obviously something that gives you enormous pleasure. You do a lot of it,
Yeah.
and
Well,
so is it the
I'm a
actual
book.
process of printmaking that you enjoy?
Yeah, it's both. It's funny. I was talking to someone just a couple nights ago about who was into metal work or something like that, and we agreed. It's like we were talking about all the unpleasant aspects of working around a forge.
Mhm.
The burns you get in a printing press, working on all
And you're
this
hot,
toxic
you're
junk.
sweaty, you're greasy.
Yes, everything sucks, and we were both like, yes. I mean, you have to have like a basic sensual attraction. You have to like the smell of molten metal. You have to like the smell of printer's ink and solvent. You know what I mean? I honestly think it, if you're going to get into one of those types of hands-on fields, you have to have that fundamental enjoyment of the
Yeah, I agree. Like
material.
turpentine and Damar varnish, you got to like those smells.
Yeah. But printing, I've always been a bookworm and a book collector, and I've always been attracted to prints. I remember when I first started drawing, I was Albrecht Dürer was one of my heroes. You can still
Oh
see
yeah,
a lot of that
oh my God, there's one of the gods.
influence in my, but all that, 16th, 17th century engraving, I just thought was brilliant. I still like today. That kind of gets back to what we were talking about earlier about my suspicion. What's the word for fear of empty space? Isn't there a word for that?
There has to be. I don't know what it is.
Whatever the fuck it is. Anyway, yeah, but if you look, yeah, the way they do those old engravings, and I'm trying to do this in my ink drawings these days, is like there's so much information imparted by the artist onto the surface, into the image. It's not like, that this section of this leg, it's not just a clump of paint or a color. It's composed of 20 different lines running one way, 13 lines going the other way. There's stroke after stroke. There's so much energy in it, if it's done right. So I think that's a brilliant, possibility you have with that kind of line work. It's just layers of energy and thought in the representation.
Yeah,
Each
well,
stroke.
actually, that's a good way to put it because it is energy, right? But the energy is literally embedded. I mean, it's a different kind of capturing of the energy, which is one of the real attractions of printmaking in general.
Yeah. I mean, well, printmaking has this, as you say, I'm very conscious of art history, even if I'm not actively, sitting down and trying to inject it into pictures. It's certainly in the back of my mind. And the history of printmaking is much more informal and mass appeal than painting. So the subject matter of prints has always been, it's much more, it's more frivolous, so you can sort of relax a great deal more. You don't have this sort of, imposing intimidation of like confronting a 4-foot canvas or something, an altarpiece.
Yeah, well,
It's
you're
great.
right. Because one of the things I like about your printmaking images is they're far more playful. And even if the subject matter, and some of them is quite serious, in fact, I say it's kind of like a head-on collision between Goya and Mad Magazine, really, is how I viewed it. They're very, very playful in terms of how you're approaching how you do what you do. I get the sense you're just having more fun.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, the subject matter for sure. The process, oddly enough, is more hair raising with printmaking because you have to be much more process oriented. and follow rules and all that sort of shit, especially with lithographic stones. It's a very unforgiving sort of way of drawing. So yeah, the subject matter is kind of goofy, and yet the process, that's kind of odd now that I think about it. I mean, oil painting is more august in your mind as you say, oh lordy, it's going to be an oil painting. Whereas you can paint over it and scrape it off 1,000 times, it doesn't matter. Whereas a print, shit, now you think, oh, what the hell? It's like Hogarth's Drunken Harlots. It's for fun. But the process is much less forgiving. I mean, if you fuck up the plate you've engraved most of or the lithostone you're working on, you're really out of luck. So, yeah, there's a little weird little variance there.
Okay, well, so then you do feel that those two things are equal, that you have exact equality in terms of how much fun you're having with the image, with what's required in terms of discipline of pulling the image off, that they're basically 50-50?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm really puzzled by that because lithography, one of the reasons I'm attracted to it is the procedure is so all or nothing. You have to do a huge amount of preparatory work, get the stone ready. I mean, you start drawing on the stone, it's very hard to correct. So it's essentially like you're drawing ink on paper. So it's like you're challenging yourself to perform, and it really focuses your mind. But yeah, subject matter. I always have a freer sort of approach to it. Although
I just
it's
found
also
them more
the case.
playful. I found your prints more playful.
Yeah. Oh,
And I think,
yeah.
just and another thing I want to point out, which may or may not matter here, but the prints are also smaller. They're 9x7, they're 10x8, and maybe that's a factor that the distillation is more intense because the image is smaller. Maybe that has something to do with it.
Yeah, definitely. That's something to do with it. It's also, as I think about it, I mean, prints are I'm much more inclined anyway to work in a series, in a suite of prints, a series of prints. And that always appeals to me. And that involves a certain amount of planning ahead. So now you can't just wing it. You're not in the studio with the drawings or the paintings and sort of letting them make themselves or drift off in whatever direction they want. You're committing a certain amount, A, to the process and all the difficulties involved there, and B, to projecting it out. Like, I want to do a series of 4 pictures about X or 10 pictures about Y. And so, yeah, it's interesting though, but then yet the subject matter is, I agree with you, it's much more playful, much more fun. The process is
also let's talk about the fact that it's more of a narrative structure. You're essentially telling stories when you're doing a set of prints like the ones I saw at Secret Gallery. And granted, it's a wide ranging story, but there's still a narrative construct. It's linear. It's point A to point B, and all of these images. In the case of the suite that I saw, I believe it was 10 total. All 10 of those are a combined single narrative, which also gives you an enormous amount of latitude, even though you have really finite discipline to pull it off. You have a lot of latitude in how you do that. I mean, is that part of your process?
Well, I think of it whenever you a printmaking process. If you're planning a suite of prints, you're just imposing limits everywhere. It seems to me, like you might want to do 8 pictures of X subject, let's say, and then suppose you get to number 8 and you feel like, well, I'm just starting going strong, or I'm really liking this idea. I could do a lot more of these. Now, of course, you can just say, well, fuck it, I will make more. But that would be contrary. At that point, you begin to drift off your original idea. And so, this sort of circles back to, I have all these pictures, as Chris was pointing out, they're essentially like sketches. They pile up, they're unfinished. And after a certain amount of time goes by, you look back at them and you think, well, fuck, I could do more work on this or I couldn't. And there's a weird decision to be made there because, in a sense, I feel like for a picture to be good, it has to be, made with the same state of mind, same person you were when you started the picture. You have to be the same person when it's done, or pretty close. You know what I mean? You begin it with a certain series.
I agree. I agree with that. Yeah.
And can you go back 2 years later, and you can always think of something else to do to it? But will it just look grafted on? Like these will be two distinct things crammed together. So I don't have any hard and fast rules for that. It's just sort of interesting to me that spirit, whatever the fuck it is, does exist. There's a certain continuity that has to be in a picture, it seems to me, for it to be strong.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because when I saw your pieces, that's one of the things I responded to is that you honored either the visual or thematic elements within a series, and then when it was done, it's done. So if I'm hearing you correctly, Sam, if you have an idea and you're going to do a series of lithographies and you say, okay, I'm going to use 8 images to explore this idea, it is finite, then that stands as a single body of work and you move on to the next thing.
Yeah, well, that would be the framework. And I'm not saying you can't break it if you really feel like it. I'm just saying you sort of do have to consider it. Like, wait a minute, it might be these are all completely self-imposed limitations, but I think they're legitimate in the sense, at least in the sense of what I think makes a good, complete picture and what doesn't.
And so would you find those self-imposed limitations crucial to how you work within those bodies of work? I mean, if you already know that this is your finite limitation, you're going to explore that to the very best of your ability and then move on.
Yeah, the more I do this work, the more I appreciate like deadlines and restrictions. You have to have a start and a stop. It's what makes the picture eventually. And it's hard to put into words exactly. I remember I heard an interview with a movie director, John Huston, late in his career. And he was saying, yes, when we were young, they worked on the studio system where they were constantly being told what to do and had to kiss ass to the producers and the guys with money and make compromises and blah, 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 blah. But he said, it's like, and then afterwards they became famous, he and the other directors, to do whatever the hell they wanted. He said, to be honest, I have to admit I did my best work under all those, constrictions and pressure, like the Maltese Falcon and Treasure of the Sierra Madre and these great films. He didn't say he did all his best work, but he said it. And I don't know, I'm kind of rambling here, but yeah, it's essentially stating the obvious that you do have to. There's a guy I know I went to the San Francisco Art Institute with, in fact, and he used to do paintings, and he's moved on to these kind of computer-generated things, which look like swaths of ink on a piece of metal, sort of. I'm not even sure what the process is, but they're essentially computer-generated. You can color them to your heart's content. You can make them transparent. And then he rearranges them in collage shapes and layers them with one in front of the other ad infinitum. And it's just, I asked him one time, like, do you worry about this, the options here just overwhelming your critical faculty? At what point do you say, it doesn't matter, I can just keep pushing this button and have 1,000 more variations of this? And he said, yes, I did. He said it did worry him. And it's like, well, so you have to, and that's like the performance aspect. You compare it to a musician. It's like you can sit in your room and practice and tootle away and amuse yourself. But if you're on stage, you have to start and stop and play a piece of music. So that's a different mindset. I mean, they're all, valid for what they are, but they're distinct. And I think a framework of a similar sort is necessary in art, visual art, which is to say,
I agree with
you. Have to know. So where does that come from? It can only come from yourself. And there you go. There's a ramble about, and some of that has to do with the print. The difficulties imposed by printmaking. These are limitations and difficulties, but they're also the framework, part of the necessary framework to make a picture and say it is done. This is it. Does it suck or does it not?
And are part of those difficulties economic? I mean, is there's an economic component that obviously is sitting in the room, and is it more expensive to produce a series of prints, and therefore you have to be more disciplined about how you approach it?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you have to prepare the plates. The procedure is it's a pain in the ass. So yes, you're imposing, and it has limitations. If you decide to etching, without getting too technical, etching or lithography or silkscreen all have different strengths and weaknesses. So, yeah, it's sort of a lot. I mean, a lot of people ask, like, why the fuck are you doing this when you can just, draw a picture and have it reproduced by a computer ad infinitum? And it's a fair question. And the answer is, I think, and I could be wrong, that it's because of the difficulty you impose on yourself. It affects your thinking and the way you approach the work. And just what you're saying, it's difficult to do this. You think of it differently. If it doesn't matter at all, if you can just, like the case of the guy with the computer generated images, if it takes nothing out of you, it's just appearing there without any effort or cost. It's sort of I lost my thread, but I think maybe I blurted out something sensible during there.
Well,
yeah, but actually, like struggle builds character.
That's what I did, son. What the fuck?
But also, isn't it also the opposition of the virtual world as opposed to the physical world? When you have a printmaker that's doing lithography where there's an actual physical demand, and you have a guy that's sitting in front of a computer terminal who's working virtually and says, well, I'm also producing prints because I can put them on archival paper and sell them as editions or whatever. Those are two very, very different things. And I would understand that the physical printmaker is there's just the physical demands are so much higher. It's a different arena.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, making a painting, there's certain limitations. I mean, paint costs money. You have to consider that. The canvases cost money. They're a pain in the ass to stretch. I mean, work is involved on all fronts. And I am a believer in the application of the hand. Like I say, like with the engraving, the idea of each line has been like contemplated and struck, created by the artist. Now that to me adds something to the picture, the image. And similarly, although not on the same plane, because it doesn't directly affect the image, but the limitations in the process of printmaking involve, the thought and motion and activity on the part of the artist. And that is reflected in the final product, I believe.
Well, I do too. And I'm talking about the actual physical commitment. So when I saw there was a retrospective of M.C. Escher's work, and at the very end of some of the images on the wall, there was the actual woodcut where he had, once he ran his edition, just took a saw or just took a drill and drilled a hole through the woodcut so that no further editions could be printed. And to actually see the physical wood, to understand that he'd gone in there and carved it out and produced that series of images, is so different than someone sitting on a computer in a virtual world.
I think you talk about what you do as a job, because I think that's relevant to who you are as an artist as well, and how you look at your craft.
Yes, the working with your hands and building shit and doing little problem solving. Certainly, I bring a lot of that mindset really to making pictures. Any picture you make is, I don't know. I do make comparisons in my own mind, at least when I'm working. Like, you just have to bite it sometimes and you have to get your hours in, to make art.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess in the sense that I'm always working with my hands and whatnot does inform my art process. I might be better served if I'd often think it's like, if I could get the same money, if I could just get like a night watchman job or something where I don't have to think at all. maybe might be better for me work-wise. But there's another part of me that's this is just like with the wishing for trouble part, like if the difficulties are important, this essentially becomes the theory. So the glorious impedimenta of life, like irritation makes the pearl, it is the resistance which makes the explosion. It's XYZ.
Struggle builds character,
etc. So you think, yes, heap on the aggravations.
So we've had this discussion about, is digital art real art, or the value of sort of computer generated things versus the old techniques of doing stone lithography and so forth. Yeah. And I was wondering if maybe there might be a way somehow to make computer work extremely difficult, like make your keyboard sharp or something.
I like it. I hadn't thought of that. There's an idea. Yeah, or to have the keys like randomly heating up to red hot.
Right.
Yeah, there's lots of things. Shooting little laser beams out of the screen into your eyes. I don't know. I hadn't thought of that.
You have to actually ride a stationary bike really fast in order to power your computer for small spurts of time, Yeah,
well, I mean, I do believe there's an energy, there's a creative thought, there's an effect that comes from drawing, because you're looking at a thing, you are looking at it and deciding what is the first thing which arrests my eye, the earlobe, the elbow, the tit, whatever, and you start, and then your mind and eye follow to another place. It's all being translated into your hand, of course. So it's not merely the physicality, it's like the intellectual, psychological process of making a picture.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to say that someone who gets their hands blown off by their aggressive keyboard, for example, can't make art.
Jeez.
But I think, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
It didn't make any sense to me.
Well, if you're using a pencil,
makes a lot of sense, Sam.
If you're using a pencil, the lead wears down and you have to resharpen it. If you're using paint, you have to go back and get more paint, so that even in the process of your brain going to your hand and your hand going to whatever you're working on, the actual tool itself needs to be like refreshed. It needs to be, it's part of the process. It needs to be taken care of.
Yeah. Well, you have to make the damn thing. You have to create it somehow. You have to make, and that's basically a sort of a continuous process of infinite small decisions, and that is the process. I'm speaking somewhat facetiously. It's not purely just any form of difficulty would, create the same effect. But you have to, you have to transform idea into object somehow.
Right. Cool.
Oh, Lordy.
Well, Sam, thank you very much. This has been really great, and it's always a pleasure talking with you.
Yeah, it's a blast chatting with you.
Thank you both. I really appreciate your interest. I don't mean to sound dismissive about anything. It's just, honestly, I'm a bit baffled myself. So, I just throwing it out there, answering as best I can.